Thank you all for being here tonight. It is important to be educated on the issues before you undertake activism, because that is so much more effective and so much more convincing to the opinion leaders and especially the lawmakers that you are trying to communicate with. They are so overwhelmed with information. You can never assume that they will have had the chance to become educated on an issue themselves. And I know a lot of you have found that out on other issues like Common Core and some other things. While Massachusetts is most definitely an attractive place that many people coming here illegally or staying here illegally are seeking out, we know that from government intelligence reports, I believe there's a reason why Massachusetts does not have the same policies as California or Connecticut or even Maryland, certainly not Illinois. And I believe that's because there are people like you who have been active and been able to prevent some of the worst policies from taking effect. And that's a tribute to you all and the causes that you've been involved in and the work that you've done and the reading that you've done to be able to communicate this in an articulate way. And it's very, very effective. Tonight I wanted to focus on three different things. I wanted to bring you up to date. A lot of people have been interested in the status of the president's executive actions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and spend a little bit more time on something that has always been out there as an immigration issue that most people have not realized is an immigration issue. It's been dormant for a long time, but has come to the forefront of issues, and that is the matter of trade agreements, which I know a lot of people are like, what does this have to do with immigration? And I will definitely explain that. But that's, I just want to spend a few minutes, first of all, on the lawsuit in Massachusetts. Last week, there were arguments before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, a panel of 3 judges who were considering a request by the Obama administration to lift an injunction that one of the Fifth Circuit federal judges had imposed to block the president's actions that were announced in November to give amnesty to about 5 or 6 million people living here illegally. And there were about 12 executive actions that were part of this. But the judge issued an injunction because 26 states around the country sued the federal government and said, you can't do that, essentially. I mean, the president has been acting with his pen and phone very vigorously for a couple of years now, and finally, a group of states got together and made a persuasive case that the judge said, we've got to hold, the constitutionality and the process here have to be considered. And so they've put that injunction on hold. I listened to the arguments. Often what was happening last week was that the Obama administration was asking this panel of judges to hear their request to lift the judge's injunction against the executive actions, saying that, and they made basically 2 arguments. They said that the president that has the right to do what he announced he would do, because it is simply an exercise of what they call prosecutorial discretion. In other words, a police officer has the authority not to issue a ticket if you're caught speeding. He can give a warning, or he can say, I'm not going to give you a ticket this time. Or if somebody's shoplifting, to say, I'm not going to arrest you this time. And that's this grant of amnesty to 5 or 6 million people living here illegally is nothing more than that. Of course, that's a flawed analogy, because even if a police officer doesn't give someone a speeding ticket, he doesn't also give them permission to speed, which is what the president's executive action did. But even more interestingly, as I was listening to the arguments that were webcast, The president's lawyers from the Department of Justice actually tried to make the argument that the injunction should be lifted because the Department of Homeland Security can't do its job to enforce the law unless they're allowed to give out 5 to 6 million work permits to people so that ICE agents can tell who they should deport and who they should not deport. And that it was actually necessary for them to have these work permits so that we would know who the illegal aliens are. Well, you know, of course, what has come to light recently, and especially today, is that, you know, the president's previous executive amnesty, DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals for the Dreamers, they don't know who those people are either. We've learned today at a Senate, the Senate Judiciary Committee held an oversight hearing and reported that the president's administration has given amnesty already to 282 people who have known criminal gang affiliations. And so far, one of them has already been charged with the murder of 4 people in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I would suggest that amnesty policy isn't doing a very good job of weeding out all the criminal aliens and certainly not assisting with public safety. So I have a feeling these arguments are going to fall flat. Maybe not for that reason, but you know, that reason fell flat with me. The 26 states, on the other hand, are saying this is not prosecutorial discretion. You're giving out work permits. You're abdicating the executive's responsibility to faithfully execute the laws as passed by Congress. And we deserve, as states who are affected by this, because we have to accommodate and provide social services to all of these millions of people who will suddenly become eligible for all kinds of public benefits that U.S. citizens and legal immigrants are getting, had no voice in this. And immigration is administrative laws, and there's a procedure to be followed, and the Obama administration ignored it. And that actually was the major reason that the judge issued the injunction in the first place, is because they hadn't asked for any notice and comment before the rules were put into place. And finally, the states argued that it's a very costly proposition for them, as I just said. So the news media are trying to portray this as one cranky judge in Texas who is halting the Obama administration's great initiative that will keep us safe. But really, it's the fact that 26 states got together and took it upon themselves to bring this lawsuit and make very credible legal arguments about the unconstitutionality of this initiative. Of course, our state is not one of those, even though we are, you know, certainly going to be affected by it. On the contrary, our Attorney General, Maura Healey, filed an amicus brief in support of the president's action, saying that it would benefit our state if all these people were to be issued amnesty. But our governor has not joined the lawsuit. Last week, the House of Representatives, the Democrats, passed a resolution in support of the president's amnesty. There was one member of the Massachusetts delegation who did not sign it. Does anybody know who that is?
No. Lynch.
Lynch.
Oh,
Stephen Lynch is the only one of the Massachusetts delegation who, well, that's what we have.
Well, but none of the Republicans signed on, right?
Well, no, we're talking about the congressional, U.S. Congress,
Yeah.
federal representatives. He's the only one who appears to have some level of discomfort with what the president is trying to do and was not willing to put his name on that. My best guess is that the panel of judges will not be inclined to side with the Obama administration and lift the block on this executive action. I'm told that it is very, and all this has to do with because they are generally loath to do anything that will change the status quo while this case is pending on the constitutionality grounds, and that they have said that they know that the Obama administration is not deporting people anyway, So there seems to be no reason to let this huge expansion of amnesty go forward when there's a question about the constitutionality of it. The next thing that's going to happen is that there will be a hearing on the actual merits of the case before the first judge, Judge Hainan, who issued the injunction. He will rule months after that, probably. Whatever happens is going to be appealed, probably twice, maybe up to the Supreme Court, and this is going to play out at least until next year at this time, most people seem to believe. Probably even longer than that. So that's a good thing that this administration has been blocked from this massive executive action. That's the good news. So we can thank those 26 states. The bad news is that the president continues almost on a weekly basis to make new changes in immigration law that are outrageous, unprecedented, costly, and increasing illegal immigration, I'm afraid. One of them is, remember the surge of Central Americans last year? The administration has said that it doesn't want a repeat of that, so instead they've started a refugee program in Central America to allow illegal alien parents here to ask for refugee status for any children that they left behind, at the same time expanding the definition of what a refugee is and expanding the range of services that are provided to them. And just last night, they issued an action saying that if any of these kids, once they get here, there's a special status that Congress created which was intended for orphaned or abused kids who were found here illegally, of which there have always been just a few. But now the immigration lawyers have figured out how to get state courts to declare any kids who've had difficult lives to be wards of the state. Some of you may remember there was a bill in our state legislature last year that was defeated, not approved, that would have limited the age at which they could apply for these visas. Last night, the Obama administration announced that as long as these kids get their applications in before they're age 21, no matter how long it takes to adjudicate their cases, they will still give them the green cards. So that was just last night. A couple weeks ago, they decided to offer work permits to the spouses of guest workers. And before that, they're also pressing to expand the admission of Syrian refugees to come here. So this is, I tell you, it literally is every week there's something. And Congress is having trouble keeping up with it. But this is why, we've got 2 more years of this at least. Massachusetts needs to take action. We at least need to do what we can in our state to reduce the incentives for people to choose Massachusetts as opposed to, say, California or Illinois or somewhere like that, or maybe just not come at all. Governor Baker, I believe, has the right instincts, at least with respect to illegal immigration, and has made some very positive and constructive statements about what he would like the policies to be. And he's got some things to undo, too, from the previous administration. But he has been silent so far. He's talked about reforming the registry, which is critically important, because that Massachusetts driver's license is the gateway to everything else. But there is more they could do. He's named a new registrar, but the old registrar, I'm told, is still in a consulting role at the registry. I believe that he'll eventually move to bring Massachusetts into compliance with Real ID, but we haven't really seen any progress towards that yet. He could do a lot of things by executive action, for example, verifying the Social Security numbers of people who apply for licenses and a few other things. But we haven't seen any movement in that direction yet. He could implement E-Verify for state agencies and contractors. And he could undo Deval Patrick's policies that were hostile to secure communities and essentially tried to sabotage federal immigration enforcement efforts, especially with respect to criminals, I suspect that those probably will go. Maybe it's just, they may have happened already, but one of the most important areas that is badly in need of attention at the state level is the issue of providing social service benefits to people who are here illegally. And these are benefits that are not required by federal law. I'm not talking about emergency health care or anything that's of a humanitarian nature. But the most notorious benefit that illegal aliens can get here, and people with this quasi status that the president keeps giving people, is public housing benefits. And possibly this afternoon, one state rep, Shauna O'Connell from Taunton, introduced an amendment to the budget resolution that would change the policy so that every applicant for public housing benefits in the state would have to demonstrate the same eligibility that you have to do for federal public housing programs, and that is you have to have a social security number or show that you have legal status. It's a very common sense thing that you really, it's like, why aren't we doing this already? But we know that we are. We've got Auntie Zatuni, everybody's familiar with that case. And Massachusetts, as a matter of state policy, has been providing public housing benefits. In the meantime, seniors, veterans, disabled people are closed out of these programs, which are scarce. If ever there was a zero-sum game situation with respect to providing benefits, public housing is one of them, because there are only there's so many dollars to go around, so many places where people can go. And so U.S. citizens should have priority for them, followed by legal immigrants who've been here for some time. Under federal law, even legal immigrants can't get these benefits until they've had a green card for 5 years. But not so with our policy here in the state. So when this amendment became public, the main immigrants' rights group, MIRA, held like a big rally on the states of the Capitol saying that victims of domestic violence were going to be thrown out on the street, and all kinds of people were going to be tossed out of public housing on their ear, and children would be left homeless because of this policy. And my understanding is that even some members of the Republican caucus began to get cold feet about it. I took the time to write up a 2-page fact sheet for distribution to them. And I was told that there was going to be a vote at some point this week, but apparently it may be taking place tonight on what the truth is about that. This is a common sense. We're simply aligning our state policy with that of the federal government on who gets access to public housing. So, watch your news outlets tonight to find out if they voted on it and what the outcome was. And we'll have to get the list of people in the House and how they voted, whether they, think it's better to allow illegal aliens access to scarce benefits that are, when we have seniors and vets and disabled folks who are not. This, again, is a policy that could be enacted by the governor himself if he chose. So depending on what the outcome of this vote is, I think will give us some ideas on how to move forward with this idea. But this really should be one of the top issues that the legislature is dealing with. When we're faced with the budget crisis, we're faced with the prospect of more and more people coming here illegally and being granted quasi-legal status by the president. This is unsustainable. So I will try to keep you all posted through the Northborough Tea Party and America First immigration reform, and hopefully the news media will be following this as well. But that's, if we have that much trouble talking about what is a common sense issue, unless citizens and voters start communicating with the legislature, they're just going to crawl under a rock and not, want to take on this issue, because there will be protests, unfair maligning of the proposals from the immigrants' rights groups, and that, we just have to deal with. But if the voters have a chance to find out what's going on and register their opinions with lawmakers, then we can make a difference. So let's move on to trade agreements. And afterwards, I'll take questions on any of these topics, but I wanted to spend some time on the trade agreements, because it is something that has...
Should we show the video now?
Yes. I just wanted to, by way of introduction, talk about this. How many of you have heard about the trade agreements that, in general, that the president is promoting? Okay, so, and there are really two issues involved here. One is the trade agreement itself, which is called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a free trade agreement with 12 nations, including the United States, to liberalize trade. That's the stated goal. And the other is what's known as Fast Track Authority, or Trade Promotion Authority, which is a mechanism that we've had in the past that has enabled the executive branch to negotiate a free trade agreement and then bring it to Congress for either an up or down vote. And then, Congress can't change it, can't amend it. This is how we got NAFTA and a few other things. And so it's important, I think, to keep in mind in this discussion that the issue is not, is free trade a good thing? The issue is the process and what our leaders are putting on the table in terms of commitments to other countries. So one fellow who has done, Dick Morris, who's a political consultant, I think he calls himself a Republican, but I know that he was a consultant to the Clinton administration also, so I think he's kind of bipartisan, produced a really excellent explanation of what the problem is with the proposal that the president is pushing. So let's roll it, and then I'll have some things to add afterwards.
This proposed trade deal isn't a backdoor to amnesty. Dick Morris is taking a closer look at this, and he'll talk about that next here on America's Forum.
This is huge, and I hope that everybody listening takes action. Call your senator about it. If he's a Republican, he's voting wrong. I don't think that people understand that in this deal, which is a trade agreement among Australia, Malaysia, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, Canada, United States, Mexico, Peru, and Chile, there is a provision for free flow of workers, just like in the European Union. What that means is unrestricted immigration. It means literally that Congress would not have the authority to restrict immigration because a treaty supersedes a statute under our Constitution. In Power Grab, the book you were talking about, Robert, we warn that Obama is going to try to circumvent the legislative process and use the treaty-making authority to do stuff that Congress can't repeal and a future president can't change. And as he enters the 7th year of his presidency, that's what he's focused on. This deal, under the guise of a trade agreement, saying, oh, it's another NAFTA. Well, the left opposes NAFTA, but I supported it, and I still do. But the point is that under the guise of NAFTA, it's providing for unrestricted immigration within these 11 countries, which means any Mexican can come to the United States legally, stay here, be naturalized, become a citizen, and vote.
So this becomes the stealth approach to amnesty. This
Not
is
just amnesty, but amnesty is for people that are already here. This says, come on in. This says that anybody in Mexico can move to the United States anytime that he wants. And the Congress can't do anything about it. The Constitution enumerates the powers of Congress. One of them is immigration and naturalization. This supersedes that, and it does so for all time, because you can't repeal a treaty unless the other 10 signatories agree. And it's even more important than that. I'll get to this in another segment later on. It also could become the way to get climate change in. He's taking the whole legislative agenda and putting it in a treaty, getting it ratified, and then it becomes as good as a constitutional amendment.
So, yeah, it's an all-purpose constitutional amendment, really like a trash compactor for the Constitution.
It all goes back to what the Europeans did in the European Union. They couldn't pass it in any country, the new Constitution. So what they did is they signed a treaty, and they put the whole thing in a treaty, and treaty-making powers are far more executive. And in this case, Obama's putting it in a treaty and asking Congress to approve fast-track authority. The idea that with all the power this president has grabbed, the Republicans are about to give him fast track, which means he can do any trade agreement he wants and ratification is almost automatic. And the Democrats are opposing this. It is entirely Republican votes that are pushing it, and they just don't understand what's in the damn bill.
So the bottom line on this whole situation is Republican legislators, members of the House, members of the Senate especially, better take a closer look at this deal. And you're saying everybody within the sound of our voices needs to pick up the phone and call Washington right now.
And particularly if you have a Republican senator call them and say, I'm a Republican, and I oppose the Pacific trade deal and the fast track authority because immigration is in it.
And the immigration would be unlimited. It would supersede the
We
Constitution.
take away Congress's powers to limit immigration and vest it in the treaty that we can't alter instead.
The cynical part of me sees members of the Washington establishment on the Republican side saying, here's a way to clear the decks on immigration.
No, they know that all those people will vote against it. They just don't know what's in there. And what Obama's doing, and we predicted this in Congress, is he's taking his entire agenda and putting it in a treaty, and then on top of that, putting in fast track. Fast track says you can't amend the treaty. You have to vote it up or down in 60 days.
So the bottom line is, let them feel the heat, and hopefully they'll see the light.
Yeah. And it's so hard to talk about because everyone thinks this is about Japanese automobiles or, U.S. banks getting more market share overseas or, selling American products overseas. Trade, it's something that, is a basic tenet of economics, that more trade makes us all better off. But that's the problem, is these treaties aren't about trade alone, or they're about trade that is defined differently from the way most of us would define it. And the key here is movement of natural persons, or what they call trade in services. So to you and I, or to you and me, trade might be, trade in services might be a bank, opening up branches in Mexico and Japan and Malaysia. But when a U.S. bank goes over to another country, it doesn't bring all of the workers from the United States. It's not as disruptive in terms of the employment market in other countries. What most of these other countries are talking about when they talk about trade in services is bringing people over here to do jobs that Americans are currently doing. And they're talking not just about computer programmers or IT workers, they're talking about nurses, teachers, accountants. Pretty much anything can be defined as a service. Immigration researchers, name your job. It can be done by someone else and be called a service. Even in manufacturing, you can provide labor as a service. Farm workers are a service. Construction workers could be considered a service, and that's trade. And so we've been through this about 10 years ago when we negotiated, the U.S. negotiated trade agreements with Chile and Australia and a few other countries, Korea. And they tried to, the process is Byzantine. It's also secret. And they make offers. The countries that are negotiating these agreements make offers to one another. And that offer is a commitment to something. So what the U.S. Trade Representative does is, in our case now it's a he goes and his negotiators say, okay, here's our offer. We're going to offer X number of slots for guest workers to enter every year. And that becomes the law. And as Dick Morris said, it can't be changed by Congress. It's not set according to our national interest. It's set according to what was negotiated with the other countries. And if there are big U.S. banks or U.S. corporations or multinational corporations in the U.S. who are pushing the U.S. Trade Representative, to get something for them, what they always end up offering is entry visas to the United States in return for whatever some company wants in that other company. So Congress has gotten wise to this. 10 years ago, they got wise to it and said, we're not, they actually passed a resolution and said, you, the president, may not include immigration provisions in trade agreements. So that worked for a while, for about 10 years. They had a hearing on the Senate side, and Senator Chuck Grassley questioned the U.S. trade rep, or a member of the administration, I forget exactly which cabinet official it was, and said, are there any immigration agreements or any immigration provisions in this TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that you're negotiating with these 12 other countries? And and because you'd think it would be on a website somewhere, but it's not. It's all secret. So the answer given was, we make no changes to immigration policy in our negotiations or in our offers. It's a typical Obama administration answer to a question. What that means is, what it would be doing is setting into concrete the laws that we have now and blocking and the ability of Congress to ever change that. So right now, we accept 600,000 guest workers every year. Just last year, we admitted more than 300,000 professional guest workers every year. And even if they limit it to the professional guest workers, we're talking about, if you're familiar with the H-1B program and the L-1 visa program, which are for people with a college degree. They're not the best and the brightest in the world coming to work here. They're ordinary workers. There's currently a lawsuit. There was a scandalous case out of California. The main California utility, Southern California Edison, just fired 500 of its IT staff and made them train their replacements who were coming in on H-1B visas mostly from India and making less money. And they had to train them or they lost their severance pay.
Oh my God.
So, and they had to sign non-disclosure agreements forbidding them from talking to the media about their experience. A lot of them, courageous ones, started writing to members of Congress and told them about it. But, this is, I mean, I don't know, I think most of us probably know somebody who works for a utility. That's not a job Americans won't do. But it's a job that they can get somebody in the world to do cheaper. And it's a race to the bottom. So if we make no change to our guest worker laws, what that means is we're stuck with the dysfunctional guest worker laws that we have forever, and it's a one-way street that you can never get off of. If there is, and if you try to change your law, if Congress were to say, well, we're Congress, we're going to pass a law, we want to make it, fewer than 300,000, we think, maybe it should be 200,000 from now on. If Congress changed it, we would promptly, and other countries have tried this before in other scenarios, we would be sued as having breached our treaty obligations. And guess who decides? It's an international tribunal of international trade experts who decide whether the United States Congress did something that will harm another treaty member. They decide. How many people think that we would win? in that. It's already been done and we've lost. While under NAFTA, for example, many U.S. states had rules for nurses on the book that you have to be fluent in English to work as a nurse in a U.S. hospital. The Canadians sued us over that and said that that was a breach of NAFTA because we wouldn't take French-speaking nurses to work in certain hospitals. And it finally ended up being negotiated. But this is the kind of stuff that ends up happening. I mean, it's not like we're rivals with Canada. I mean, if somebody feels that their business interests are harmed, then they can, call it an unfair trade action, and it goes to this international tribunal. So this political situation is very sticky right now because the way this plays out is most Republicans tend to sort of knee-jerk support trade agreements. Most Democrats, because of the NAFTA experience, tend to be opposed to them. But it's not clear that the Democrats also tend to vote as a solid bloc. They have been doing that for years now. And so it's not clear yet that enough Democrats are going to, that there may be enough Democrats to stick with what the president is asking for and extract promises from the president about what's going to be in these agreements. And quite frankly, their concern is not about immigration. It's more about climate change provisions and labor provisions and all kinds of other stuff, not the immigration stuff. So if he makes a deal with them on all these other issues, which are important to them, then they could very well end up supporting this. So it's necessary for Republicans to understand what they would be signing up for. Now, frankly, I think the easiest argument with Republicans ought to be, are you really willing to give President Obama a free hand in negotiating anything whatsoever? But apparently they are willing to, and I think a lot of this is coming from Republican leadership of like, we need to show we can govern and be bipartisan and all this stuff. There are core groups of Republicans in the House and Senate that understand what Dick Morris just said, and they get it, and they've been talking to their colleagues about it, but it's not, it really is unclear now what is going to happen. So we here in the Commonwealth have an opportunity, when we've got a delegation that should be opposed to this deal on all kinds of grounds, and probably will be,